The phone started screaming at 0300, which meant someone had died or someone was about to. I grabbed it off the nightstand without turning on the light. Muscle memory from 11 years of this. Morales. Eddie. It's Johnny. Captain Johnny Bates. Though he never made me use the rank when it was just us. His voice sounded wrong, tight, like he was forcing air through a smaller throat than usual. Need you at the briefing room in 20. Full kit. I was already sitting up, feet on the cold floor of my quarters at Naval Station Norfolk. What's the situation? Distress signal. Possible chemical contamination. He paused, and in that pause I heard something I'd never heard from Johnny before. Not in 3 years of working under him. Not even when we'd pulled that IED out of a school in Kandahar that had enough Semtex to level the whole block. Missing contractors. Security personnel. Where? Nansemon Ordnance Depot, you know it? I didn't. No, sir. Good. Nobody does anymore. It's been abandoned since the 50s. World War II munitions facility, south of Suffolk, middle of the swamp. Another pause. Bring Santiago, Gross, and Barton. Full response team. Copy that. 20 minutes, Eddie. He hung up. I sat there for maybe 10 seconds, phone still against my ear, listening to dead air. Johnny's voice kept replaying in my head. That tightness. I'd spent 11 years as a Navy EOD technician, which is a fancy way of saying I got paid to kneel next to things designed to turn me into red mist. Fallujah, Kandahar, a dozen other places that all smelled the same. Burning plastic, cordite, death baked into concrete under a sun that never quit. I'd diffused bombs wired by people who'd spent their whole lives learning how to kill people like me. I'd done it with my hands shaking from adrenaline and my vest soaked through with sweat and my spotter counting down the seconds until the timer hit 0. None of that had ever made me feel what I felt listening to Johnny's voice. I got dressed. Tactical pants, boots, the kind of plain black shirt that didn't show blood if things went sideways. My hands moved through the routine without thinking. 11 years of this builds pathways in your brain that don't need supervision. The briefing room was in the basement of Building 7, which was Navy speak for the place where they sent you when the mission wasn't supposed to exist. I got there in 18 minutes. Francis was already waiting outside, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, looking like he'd been awake for hours. Probably had been. Francis didn't sleep much. "Morning," he said in that slow Texas drawl that made everything sound like he had all the time in the world. "Francis, you know what this is about? Chemical contamination, missing contractors. That's all Johnny gave me." Francis nodded once, his face doing that thing it did when he was processing bad information and deciding not to comment. We'd served 3 tours together. I could read him better than most people could read a newspaper. Edward and Declan showed up 2 minutes later, both of them moving with that eager energy young operators had before they'd seen enough shit to cure them of it. I'd trained them myself over the past 18 months. Good men, competent. Edward was meticulous, the kind of guy who checked his gear 3 times and then checked it again. Declan was faster, more instinctive, the kind of operator who could field strip a rifle blindfolded but sometimes forgot to eat lunch. "Sirs," Edward said, nodding to me and Francis. "We doing a drill?" Declan asked. He was grinning a little. Still thought 0300 callouts were exciting. "No idea yet," I said. Johnny opened the door before I could knock. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since I'd seen him at 1800 the previous day. His uniform was perfect. Johnny's uniform was always perfect. But his eyes had this hollowed-out quality that reminded me of the combat chaplain I'd met in Fallujah right after a VBIED took out a school bus. "Inside," he said. The briefing room was small, windowless, the kind of space designed to make you forget there was a world outside. Fluorescent lights that hummed just below conscious hearing. Metal table, 5 chairs, a folder sitting in the center of the table, manila and unmarked. We sat. Johnny stayed standing. At 2200 last night, Naval intelligence received a distress signal from a security team operating at the Nansemond Ordnance Depot. He spoke in that clipped cadence he used for official business, every word measured and precise. The depot was decommissioned in 1953. It's located approximately 30 miles south of here, in the wetlands between Suffolk and the Great Dismal Swamp. "What's a security team doing at a decommissioned facility?" Francis asked. "Contractor work, environmental assessment." Johnny's hands rested on the table, and I noticed his fingers were pressed flat against the metal, like he was trying to keep them from shaking. The distress call reported possible chemical exposure, multiple casualties, then the signal cut out. "What kind of chemicals?" Edward asked. He was already thinking through decontamination protocols. I could see it in the way his eyes had sharpened. "Unknown. The depot was used for experimental munitions storage during the war. Records are incomplete." Johnny picked up the folder, held it for a moment, then handed it to me. His hands were trembling. Not much. Just enough that the folder shook slightly when it passed between us. I took it. Johnny's hands didn't shake. I'd seen him sign deployment orders sending men into Helmand Province without a tremor. I'd watched him authorize controlled detonations on ordnance that could have leveled a city block, his signature steady and clear. "Your mission is reconnaissance and recovery," Johnny continued. "Locate the security team, assess the contamination risk. If you find unstable ordnance, secure it for disposal." He looked at me directly, and his pale blue eyes had that same quality I'd seen in the chaplain's, like he was looking at something behind me that I couldn't see. "If the contamination is severe, you pull back immediately and call for hazmat support." "What's the contractor company?" I asked, opening the folder. Inside were coordinates, a hand-drawn map of the depot layout, and 3 photographs of missing persons, all men, all wearing tactical gear, all with the same blank expression people had in employee ID photos. "Sentinel Tactical Solutions." Johnny's voice was flat. "Private security. They've done work for the EOD before." I'd never heard of them. That didn't mean much. There were 100 private contractors doing government work I'd never heard of, but something about the way Johnny said it made the back of my neck prickle. "Transport?" Francis asked. "Unmarked van. Keys are with the duty officer. You leave in 15 minutes. Johnny straightened, and for a moment he looked like he wanted to say something else. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. "Any questions?" Declan raised his hand like we were in a classroom. "Sir, what's the expected return time?" 0800 at the latest. This is a quick in and out." Johnny looked at me again. "Eddie, a word." The others filed out. Francis gave me a glance on his way past, one eyebrow raised slightly. I nodded. He'd wait outside. When the door closed, Johnny sat down across from me. The humming fluorescent lights made his face look gray. "I don't know what you're going to find out there," he said quietly. His Virginia Tidewater accent came through stronger when he was stressed, flattening his vowels. The orders came from above my clearance level. I asked questions. I was told to send my best team and not ask follow-up. "Johnny, I'm telling you this because you've kept me alive before, and I figure I owe you honesty." He rubbed his face with both hands. "This doesn't feel right. The timeline doesn't work. The distress call came in at 2200, but the duty logs show the last scheduled check-in from Sentinel was at 1800. 4-hour gap with no communication, then suddenly casualties and chemical exposure. Why not send hazmat first?" I suggested that. I was overruled. He stood up, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the handle. "Watch yourself out there, and if something feels wrong, you pull your team out. I don't care what the orders say." He left. I sat there looking at the folder. The photographs of the missing contractors stared back at me with their bland, bureaucratic faces. The hand-drawn map showed a simple layout: main bunker, storage annexes, perimeter fence. Nothing complicated. Nothing that should require 4 experienced operators at 0300 with full combat loadout. I grabbed the folder and headed out. The van was waiting in the motor pool, a plain white Ford with government plates and no markings. Francis was already in the passenger seat. Edward and Declan were in the back, sorting through the gear: respirators, chemical detection kits, portable diffusal equipment, enough firepower to start a small war. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. "Where are we headed?" Francis asked. "Swamp." I pulled out of the motor pool, following the route I'd memorized from Johnny's map. "Middle of nowhere, abandoned munitions depot." "Sounds lovely." Edward leaned forward from the back. "Sir, the chemical detection equipment, do we know what we're testing for?" "Negative. We'll run a full spectrum when we arrive." Declan was quiet, which was unusual for him. When I glanced in the rear-view mirror, he was staring out the window at the dark base sliding past, his expression thoughtful. We drove through the gate, past the guard station, out onto the empty highway that cut south through the Virginia wetlands. At 03:30 there was nobody else on the road, just us and the darkness and the forest pressing in on both sides. I kept thinking about Johnny's hands, the way they'd shaken when he'd handed me the folder, the way his eyes had looked hollowed out and strange. I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he was sharing, a lot more, and whatever it was, it had scared a man I'd never seen scared before. That bothered me more than the mission itself. The drive felt wrong from the start. I couldn't put my finger on it exactly, but something in my gut kept twisting tighter with every mile south. The headlights carved through fog so thick it looked almost solid, like we were pushing through something that didn't want us there. It moved weird, too, not drifting the way fog usually does, but kind of pulsing, breathing, almost. I'd driven through plenty of fog before, coastal operations, night missions in the Highlands, and none of it ever felt like this. Francis sat quiet in the passenger seat, his window cracked an inch. He had this habit of wanting fresh air no matter what, even if the fresh air smelled like swamp rot and dead fish. Which it did. The smell had been creeping in for the last 10 miles, getting thicker as the highway narrowed and the trees pressed closer. "Smell's getting worse," Edward said from the back. "Swamp," Francis said, just that one word, flat and matter of fact. "Smells like something died in it," Declan added. Francis didn't respond to that. I didn't either, because Declan was probably right, and there wasn't much point saying so. The GPS unit clipped to the dash showed we were maybe 3 miles out from the coordinates Bates had given me. The road had gone from highway to state route to what was basically a glorified dirt path with delusions of being pavement. Potholes everywhere. The van's shocks weren't great to begin with, and every crater we hit sent gear rattling in the back. I checked the rear view. Edward was running final checks on the chemical detection kit, his face lit blue by the small screen. Declan had his respirator in his lap, turning it over in his hands like he was looking for defects. Neither of them looked particularly happy to be here. Couldn't blame them. I wasn't happy either. The trees on both sides of the road were massive, old-growth stuff with trunks thick as barrels and branches that formed a canopy overhead. Spanish moss hung down in curtains, and the fog threaded through it all like smoke. My headlights barely penetrated 20 feet ahead. I slowed down to maybe 15 miles an hour, just to make sure I didn't drive us straight into a ditch. "How much further?" Edward asked. 2 miles, I said. Maybe less. Place been abandoned since when? 1953. I'd memorized the details from Bates's briefing. "We munitions depot. Experimental ordnance storage." "Experimental," Francis repeated, like he was tasting the word. "That's a hell of a thing to leave sitting in a swamp for 70 years. "Yeah. And they sent contractors to assess it before sending us." "Environmental assessment," I said. "That's what Bates said. At night." I didn't have an answer for that, because Francis was right. It didn't make sense. You don't do environmental assessments in the middle of the night. You do them during daylight with proper equipment and probably a whole team of scientists in hazmat suits. You definitely don't send 4 private security contractors. The road curved left, and my headlights swept across a rusted chain-link fence that appeared out of the fog like a ghost. It ran parallel to the road for maybe 30 yards before the road ended entirely at a gate. I slowed to a stop about 10 feet back and put the van in park. The gate was old, really old. The chain link was the same vintage as the fence, sagging and rusted orange-brown, with a padlock the size of my fist hanging from a chain looped through the center. A faded sign wired to the gate read, "Restricted Area, U.S. Navy Property, No Trespassing," in letters that had probably been read once but were now just pale pink ghosts. I killed the engine. The silence hit me immediately. Not just quiet. Silence. The kind of total absence of sound that makes your ears ring because they're trying to find something, anything, to latch onto. No insects, no birds, no wind rustling the trees, no frogs. That's what got me. The frogs. We were in the middle of a Virginia wetland in late spring. There should have been frogs everywhere, calling so loud you'd have to shout to be heard over them. Bullfrogs, tree frogs, all the little ones whose names I didn't know. I'd done enough field training in environments like this to know that frog song was basically the default soundtrack. But here, nothing. "You hear that?" I said. Francis tilted his head slightly, listening. "Don't hear anything." Exactly. He got it immediately. I saw his jaw tighten, just a fraction. Yeah, that's not right. In 11 years of combat, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, more classified operations than I was supposed to talk about, I'd learned to trust silence. Silence meant something else was listening. Predators went quiet when bigger predators showed up. Prey went quiet when they were hiding. And everything went quiet when there was something nearby that didn't belong. Could just be the chemicals, Edward offered from the back. If there's contamination, maybe it killed off the wildlife. Maybe, I said, but I didn't believe it. Chemical contamination didn't work like that. You'd have dead frogs, sure, floating in the water, scattered in the grass. You wouldn't have this kind of total absence, like every living thing had packed up and left. I reached for the door handle, then stopped. My radio crackled to life, making all of us jump. The static resolved into Bates's voice, but it sounded wrong, strained, like he was talking through his teeth. "Morales, you on site?" I unclipped the radio from my belt. Affirmative. At the main gate. More static. Then a different voice came through, one I'd never heard before. Male, calm, with an accent I couldn't place. Maybe East Coast, maybe not. The words he spoke weren't English, or if they were so heavily coded I didn't recognize a single one. A string of syllables that sounded almost like a frequency test, clinical and precise. I glanced at Francis. He was frowning at the radio like it had personally offended him. The voice stopped, static for 3 seconds. Then Bates came back. "Morales, confirm you copied those coordinates." "Negative," I said. "Didn't copy any coordinates. Repeat last transmission." Bates read off a string of numbers. I didn't have anything to write with, so I did what I'd done 100 times before in the field. I held up my left hand and used my right index finger to trace the numbers on my palm, repeating them silently until they stuck. 8 digits. A grid reference probably, though not one that matched the map he'd given me earlier. "Confirmed," I said. "Proceed to primary structure. Assess and report. Radio silence unless emergency. Bates out." The radio clicked off. I stared at it for a second, then clipped it back to my belt. "Well, who the hell was that?" Edward asked. "Don't know." And what was he saying? "Don't know that either." Francis was still looking at me. "Orders?" I opened the door. We moved forward. Standard formation. Chemical detection active. Weapons ready but holstered unless we confirm a threat. The air outside the van felt thick, humid and warm, with that rotting vegetation smell that swamps always have, but underneath it something else. Something sharp and metallic, like ozone before a thunderstorm. I pulled my flashlight from my belt and clicked it on. The beam cut through the fog in a narrow cone that didn't reach as far as it should have. Francis came around the front of the van, his own flashlight out. Edward and Declan followed, both carrying equipment bags. Edward had the chemical kit. Declan had the portable diffusal gear just in case we found any live ordnance that needed immediate attention. The gate's padlock was corroded almost completely through. I gave it a solid yank and it broke apart in my hand, the shackle separating from the body like it was made of chalk. I unwound the chain and pushed the gate open. It squealed on rusted hinges, a sound that echoed way too loud in the silence. We moved through in formation, me on point, Francis to my right and slightly back, Edward and Declan behind us in a staggered line, standard patrol configuration. I kept my flashlight low, sweeping left to right across the ground ahead. The path beyond the gate was gravel once, maybe. Now it was mostly mud and weeds, with deep ruts carved by vehicle tires that had probably last been here decades ago. Trees pressed in close on both sides, their branches forming a tunnel overhead. The fog clung to everything. 50 meters in, I found the first body. He was face down in standing water that pooled in one of the deep ruts, his arms splayed out to the sides. Tactical vest, black cargo pants, boots, standard contractor gear. The water around him was dark, and at first I thought it was just mud, but when I got closer, I could see it was too uniform, too thick. Contact, I said quietly. Deceased. Francis moved up beside me, his flashlight joining mine. The beams crossed over the body, illuminating details I really didn't want to see. The man's vest was shredded. Not torn, shredded, like something had grabbed it from behind and ripped through the ballistic fabric with enough force to scatter pieces of it across the surrounding water. I knelt down, my boots sinking into the mud. The water was maybe 3 inches deep, cold against my shins. I reached out and carefully turned the body just enough to see the badge clipped to his vest pocket. Leo Carlson, Sentinel Tactical Solutions. One of the contractors from the photos Bates had shown me. I expected bullet wounds, exit wounds, entry wounds, something that made sense in the context of a security team getting hit. Maybe an ambush, maybe friendly fire in a panic situation. What I found instead made my brain stall out for a second. Punctures, a series of them running in a perfect arc across his back from left shoulder to right hip. Each one maybe an inch in diameter, deep enough that I could see bone when I angled my flashlight right. They were evenly spaced, precise, like something with multiple limbs had driven through his spine all at once. Jesus, Edward breathed behind me. I counted them. 7 punctures total, arranged in that perfect curve. Bear, Declan suggested. His voice had gone up half an octave. Francis was crouched on the other side of the body, examining it with the kind of careful attention he usually reserved for diffusing explosives. He muttered something I didn't quite catch, then said louder, "Bear attack, maybe." But I'd seen bear kills before, 2 of them actually, one during survival training in Montana and another on a hunting trip with my uncle when I was 16. Bears mauled, they bit and clawed and tore, leaving ragged wounds that followed no pattern because bears didn't work with precision. They worked with rage and hunger. This wasn't that. This was something else. The bunker rose from the swamp about 200 meters past Leo Carlson's body, a massive concrete block that looked like it had been vomited up from the earth. I stopped when my flashlight caught it. Couldn't miss it. The thing was the size of a small warehouse, squat and ugly, with walls that had to be 3 feet thick at least. Moss and vines crawled up the sides, but underneath all that green you could still see the original gray concrete, stained dark with decades of moisture and rot. The blast doors were hanging open. That stopped me cold. I'd seen doors like these before, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, rated to withstand shaped charges, designed to seal tight enough that you'd need cutting equipment and half a day to get through them if they were locked. These doors were easily 10 feet tall, solid steel beneath the rust, mounted on hinges thick as my forearm. They hung open like a mouth. "Those should be closed," Francis said beside me. His voice was quiet, controlled, professional. "Yeah." I kept my flashlight on the doors, studying the gap between them, wide enough to walk through, wide enough that it looked deliberate. Edward moved up on my left, the chemical detection kit in his hands. He'd been running tests every 50 meters since we found Carlson. So far, everything came back negative. No chemical agents, no radiation, nothing that explained why a whole security team had ended up dead in a swamp. "You want me to test the air inside?" Edward asked. "Yeah, do it from here first." He knelt and set the kit down, pulling out the handheld sensor. Clicked it on. The small screen glowed green in the dark, numbers scrolling past as it sampled the air drifting out from the bunker entrance. I waited, listened. Still no sound from the swamp. No insects, no birds, nothing. Just our breathing and the faint electronic beep from Edward's sensor. "Clear," Edward said after 30 seconds. "No volatiles, no particulates above baseline." "Copy that." I looked at Declan, who had the diffusal gear strapped across his back. Kid was pale, but his hands were steady. "Stay tight. We don't know what's inside." My radio crackled. Bates's voice came through, strained like wire pulled too tight. "Morales, report status." I keyed the transmit button. "At primary structure. Blast doors are open. Found one deceased contractor on approach. Identification confirmed as Leo Carlson from your photos. No signs of chemical contamination." Silence for 3 seconds. Then, "Proceed inside, assess interior, and locate remaining personnel." Something in his voice made my jaw tighten. He sounded wrong. Not scared exactly, but hollow. Like he was reading from a script. "Understood," I said. Released the button. Francis caught my eye, raised one eyebrow. I shook my head slightly. "Later." I moved forward, keeping my flashlight steady on the open doors. The gap between them was maybe 4 feet across. Plenty of room. The darkness inside was absolute, the kind that swallows light. My beam penetrated maybe 15 feet before it just stopped, like hitting a wall. The smell hit me when I was 10 feet away. Copper and rust, and something chemical underneath. Not formaldehyde yet. That came later. This was sharper, like ozone after lightning, mixed with old blood. I stopped at the threshold, swept my light left to right across the interior. Emergency lighting kicked on, not motion activated. I didn't trigger anything. The lights just came on all at once, bathing everything in deep crimson. The kind of lighting you see in submarines, in bunkers, places designed to preserve night vision while providing just enough illumination to navigate. "Jesus," Declan whispered behind me. The entry corridor stretched 40 feet straight ahead, concrete walls on both sides, ceiling maybe 8 feet high, reinforced, built to last, and lined with bodies. I counted 7, all in tactical gear, black cargo pants, vests, boots, Sentinel Tactical Solutions badges on their chests. I recognized 2 faces from Bates's photos. The others I didn't know, but they all had the same look. Contractors, experienced, armed. Every single one still had their weapon. That detail stuck with me. I moved into the corridor slowly, Francis behind me and to the right, Edward and Declan following. I approached the nearest body, a guy maybe 40 years old, stocky build, lying on his back with his rifle across his chest. His finger wasn't on the trigger, wasn't even near the trigger guard. The weapon looked like it had just been resting there when he died. I knelt beside him, no visible wounds on his front. I checked his neck for a pulse anyway, just procedure, but his skin was cold. Dead at least a few hours, maybe longer. Hard to tell in this humidity. I rolled him slightly to check his back. Same wounds as Carlson, puncture marks, 7 of them, running in that perfect arc from shoulder to hip. Clean, precise, deep enough that I could see bone through the torn fabric of his vest. "Same pattern," I said quietly. Francis moved to the next body, a woman in her 30s with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. He checked her back, nodded. Yeah, same. We went down the line. All 7 had identical wounds. Same placement, same spacing, same depth, like they'd been measured. And every single face had the same expression. Confusion. That's the only word for it. Their eyes were open, most of them, and they all looked puzzled. Not scared, not angry, just confused, like they'd been shown something that didn't make sense and died before they could figure it out. I'd seen a lot of dead faces. 11 years of combat gives you that. I'd seen fear, rage, pain, resignation. This was different. This was wrong. Eddie. Francis was standing at the far end of the corridor where it opened into a larger space. His flashlight was pointed down at something I couldn't see from my position. I walked past the bodies, stepping carefully. The red emergency lighting made everything look like it was underwater, shadows pooling in corners and along the walls. When I reached Francis, I looked where he was pointing. Spent shell casings, maybe 20 of them, scattered across the concrete floor in a rough cluster. 9mm looked like. Somebody fired, Francis said. Yeah. I scanned the walls, the ceiling. No impact marks, no bullet holes anywhere. Didn't hit anything, though. Or hit something that didn't leave a mark. I didn't have an answer for that. My radio crackled again, Bates's voice even more strained than before. Morales, I need you to proceed to the lower levels. There's a stairwell access 30 meters past the entry corridor, northeast corner. I keyed the mic. Say again? Blueprint showed this facility as single level. A pause. Then a different voice came through, male, speaking in syllables I couldn't identify. Not Spanish, not Arabic, nothing I recognized. The words ran together like a frequency test, rising and falling in pitch. Then Bates again. Disregard blueprint. Proceed to stairwell access, northeast corner. Follow stairs to sublevel 2. I looked at Francis. He was staring at my radio like it had grown teeth. Captain, confirm orders, I said. You're telling me there's a sublevel that wasn't in the mission brief. Affirmative. Proceed to sublevel 2 and await further instruction. The line went dead. That wasn't right, Edward said. He'd moved up behind us with Declan, both of them looking rattled. That voice in the middle. What was that? Don't know. I clipped the radio back to my belt, looked at the space beyond the corridor. It opened into what looked like a storage area, maybe 50 feet across, with metal shelving units lining the walls. Most of them were empty. A few had cardboard boxes stacked on them, labels too faded to read in the red light. And in the far corner, exactly where Bates said it would be, I saw a doorway. I crossed the storage area, my boots echoing on concrete. The doorway was steel, propped open with a wedge, and beyond it I could see stairs descending into darkness. This isn't on any blueprint, Francis said again. He was right behind me, close enough that I could hear the tension in his breathing. I know. I stopped at the top of the stairs, shined my flashlight down. The beam caught concrete steps, metal handrails on both sides, going down at a steep angle. I couldn't see the bottom, just stairs disappearing into black. And I could hear something, faint but there, a low hum, mechanical, like generators running somewhere below. Eddie, Francis put a hand on my shoulder. This doesn't feel right. No, it doesn't. But Bates had given the order, and whatever was happening, whatever this place actually was, the only way to get answers was down. I started descending. The stairs were steep, almost ladder steep, and they kept going. I counted 30 steps before I hit a landing, and the stairs turned 90 degrees. Then another 30 steps to another landing. The air got colder as we went down, and the smell changed. Less copper, more chemical. Formaldehyde, strong enough that I could taste it, that sharp preservative stink that gets in your throat and stays there. The generator hum got louder, steady, rhythmic. the sound of serious electrical equipment running at full capacity. At the third landing, I saw light below, not red emergency lighting, white fluorescent, harsh and bright, spilling up from the bottom of the stairwell. I slowed down, motioned for the others to do the same. The stairs ended at a corridor that shouldn't exist. White tile floors, white walls, fluorescent panels running the length of the ceiling. Clean, sterile, like a hospital, except hospitals don't get built 60 feet underground in abandoned munitions depots. The generator hum was coming from somewhere ahead, echoing off the tile, and the formaldehyde smell was overwhelming now, strong enough to make my eyes water. I stepped off the stairs into the corridor. Francis came next, then Edward and Declan. We stood there for a moment, all four of us, looking at a place that the Navy had told us didn't exist. "This has been here a while," Edward said quietly. He pointed at the ceiling panels. "That's old fluorescent tech, 1970s, maybe 80s. "Bates knew," I said. The words came out flat, but inside I felt something cold settling in my chest. He knew exactly where to send us. My radio crackled. That strange voice again, the one that wasn't Bates, speaking in those incomprehensible syllables. Then silence. I looked down the corridor. It stretched maybe 100 feet before ending at a set of double doors, the kind you see in operating rooms, with small rectangular windows at eye level. This had never been about a distress signal. Whatever waited behind those doors had been here for decades, humming away in the dark beneath a facility the government claimed was abandoned, and Bates had led us right to it. The double doors opened into a laboratory that didn't match anything I'd seen in military facilities. Not Navy, not Army, not any branch I'd worked with in 11 years. The first room stretched maybe 30 feet across with white tile that reflected the fluorescent lighting in a way that made my eyes ache. 3 surgical tables dominated the center space, each one stainless steel with a drain built into the table surface. Standard design for field hospitals or emergency surgical units, but the restraints weren't standard. I moved closer to the nearest table. The straps were industrial-grade nylon webbing, the kind rated for securing cargo containers on transport ships. Thickness of maybe 2 inches. The buckles were reinforced steel with double-locking mechanisms. I counted 8 restraint points on the table. Wrists, forearms, chest, waist, thighs, ankles. Each strap showed wear marks from tension. The webbing stretched and frayed at the edges where something had pulled against them repeatedly. Francis stopped beside me and ran his flashlight along the table length. The beam caught on scoring marks in the steel surface, deep gouges that ran in parallel lines. 4 lines, evenly spaced. "What the hell needs restraints like that?" Edward said from behind us. I didn't answer. I was looking at the measurements. The distance between the wrist restraints and the chest restraint was too long. I'm 6 feet tall with proportional limbs. The spacing on this table would fit something 7 feet minimum, probably closer to 8. The second table had the same setup. The third table had darker stains around the drain that looked like dried blood that someone had tried to clean with bleach but hadn't quite managed to remove completely. Declan moved past us toward the far wall where a row of refrigeration units hummed with steady mechanical precision. Commercial-grade units, the kind used in research labs for long-term storage. He reached for the handle on the nearest unit. "Don't," I said. He pulled the handle anyway. Cold air spilled out in a visible wave, carrying the formaldehyde smell intensified to the point where I tasted it in the back of my throat. Inside the unit were rows of specimen jars, maybe 20 total, each one containing tissue samples suspended in clear preservation fluid. The tissue glowed, not reflected light from the fluorescence, not phosphorescence from chemical reaction. The samples pulsed with their own bioluminescence, a pale green that brightened and dimmed in a rhythm that looked almost like breathing. I counted the pulses, 7 seconds between each cycle. Francis opened the second refrigeration unit. More jars, same pulsing light. The third unit held larger samples in bigger containers, chunks of tissue the size of my fist that showed structure I couldn't identify. Not muscle, not organ tissue. Something fibrous and layered that contracted slightly with each pulse of light. "This is beyond our scope," Edward said. His voice had gone tight. I agreed with him. This wasn't ordnance disposal. This wasn't even hazmat cleanup. This was something else entirely. I turned away from the refrigeration units, and that's when I saw the wall. The entire west side of the laboratory was covered floor to ceiling with photographs, hundreds of them, maybe more than 1,000. Each one was a headshot printed on standard paper and tacked to a massive corkboard that spanned the full length of the wall. I walked closer. The photos showed people of varying ages, races, genders. Some looked like professional portraits. Others were clearly candid shots, grainy and taken from a distance. A few were driver's license photos, the kind with the bland DMV background and neutral expression. Every single photograph had notations written in black marker across the bottom margin. I focused on the photo nearest to me. A woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, smiling slightly. The notation read, TR042 08-15 2019, Chesapeake, inconclusive. The photo next to it showed a teenage boy with braces. TR043 08-22 2019, Portsmouth, terminated. Next photo. A man in his 60s with a gray beard. TR044 09-03 2019, Suffolk, partial success, expired 72 tours. I stepped back and scanned the full wall. The dates went back years. The earliest I could see from where I stood was from 2011. The locations were all from the Tidewater region: Chesapeake, Portsmouth, Suffolk, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Hampton. Some I recognized as small towns in the surrounding counties. Francis was reading the photos on the opposite end of the wall. "These are missing persons." "Yeah," I said. I'd seen missing person posters before. You see them in every city taped to phone poles and bulletin boards. Faces of people who vanished without explanation. The Tidewater area had hundreds over the years, probably thousands. Most people assumed runaways or trafficking or simple tragedy. Wrong place, wrong time. But here they were, cataloged, organized, marked with clinical notations like lab specimens. TR probably meant test subject. The numbers were sequential. The dates showed when they'd been acquired. The locations showed where they'd been taken from. The final notations showed outcomes: inconclusive, terminated, partial success, expired. I counted maybe 40 photos marked partial success. The rest were split between the other categories. "Eddie," Francis's voice had dropped lower. He was pointing at a photo in the upper right section of the wall. I moved over. The photo showed a young woman with blonde hair and a wide smile, maybe early 20s. The notation read, TR187 03-12 2023, Norfolk, full integration, active. The date was 4 months ago. The location was Norfolk, where our base was located, and the outcome didn't match the pattern of the others: full integration, active. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't want to know. A sound came from the back of the laboratory, past another set of doors that led deeper into the sublevel, a metallic clatter, like something falling. Then silence. I drew my sidearm. Francis and Declan did the same. Edward set down the chemical detection kit and pulled his weapon. We moved toward the sound in standard formation, weapons raised, flashlights tracking with our line of sight. The doors weren't locked. I pushed through into a corridor identical to the one we'd descended from, white tile and fluorescent panels, stretching maybe 50 feet before branching left and right. A door halfway down the corridor on the right side stood open, supply closet based on the shelving visible through the doorway. "Federal agents," I called out. Not true, but close enough. "Show yourself." Movement inside the closet, something shifting, then a voice, high and trembling. "Don't shoot. Please don't shoot." A man emerged with his hands raised. Mid-40s, thin build, maybe 5'8". Thinning brown hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. Wire-framed glasses sitting crooked on his nose. He wore a white lab coat over a dress shirt and slacks, both rumpled. The lab coat had dark stains across the front that looked like blood spatter. His hands were shaking so badly I could see the tremor from 15 feet away. "On the ground," I said. "Hands behind your head." He dropped immediately, no resistance, just collapsed to his knees, and then forward onto his stomach with his hands laced behind his head. Practiced motion, like he'd been expecting this. Francis moved forward and secured him, checking for weapons. Nothing. Just a wallet in his back pocket and an ID badge clipped to the lab coat. I read the badge. Dr. Jacob Brown. The logo showed a company name I'd never heard of, Paracelsus Applied Sciences. No government insignia, no military designation, private contractor. "On your feet," I said. Francis helped him up. Dr. Brown stood there swaying slightly, his face pale and his eyes red-rimmed, like he'd been crying for hours. "Are you injured?" I asked. He shook his head. "The blood's not mine." "Whose is it?" "Everyone's." His voice broke on the word. "Everyone who was down here." I glanced at Francis. He gave me a slight nod. I holstered my weapon. "How many people were down here?" I asked. 12, no, 13, including the security team upstairs. Dr. Brown's breath was coming fast and shallow. "I was in the monitoring station when it happened. I saw it on the cameras. I locked myself in and then I ran when it moved to the north wing." "When what moved?" His eyes went unfocused. "The subject." "What subject?" "TR-187. He said it like a confession. "She achieved full integration 6 weeks ago. We thought she was stable. We thought we could control the behavioral patterns through the conditioning protocols." I had no idea what he was talking about. I tried a different angle. "Who do you work for?" "Paracelsus Applied Sciences. Defense contractor. We've been operating this facility since 1979 under naval intelligence oversight. Black budget. Deep classification." The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them in for too long. The original specimens were recovered from the swamp in 1952. Dormant biological material. The Navy tried to study them in the 50s and 60s, but didn't have the technology. They sealed everything and classified it. Then, in the 70s, someone decided to try again. "Try what?" Francis asked. Dr. Brown looked at him. Tears were running down his face now, cutting tracks through the grime and sweat. "Weaponization," he said. "We were trying to weaponize them." The formaldehyde smell seemed stronger suddenly. The fluorescent lights hummed above us with a frequency that made my teeth ache. "Weaponize what?" I asked. "We don't have a proper name. The original reports called them polypoids because of the morphology. Multi-limbed, adaptive biology, extreme resilience to environmental stress. They were dormant when we found them, maybe for centuries, fossilized in the deep swamp sediment, but the tissue was still viable at the cellular level." He was talking faster now, the words tumbling over each other. "We started with basic regeneration studies, tissue samples, growth patterns. Then we moved to genetic integration, hybrid development. We wanted to create soldiers that could survive anything, heal from any wound, adapt to any environment. We used human subjects to test the integration process." I thought about the wall of photographs, the hundreds of missing people, the notations, inconclusive, terminated, partial success, expired. "The early trials failed," Dr. Brown continued. "The subjects rejected the genetic material, or the material consumed them too quickly. We refined the process, controlled dosing, behavioral conditioning, psychological preparation. 6 months ago, we achieved partial integration with TR-186. The subject survived for 4 days before systemic failure. Then we tried TR-187. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "She was perfect, 22 years old, healthy, strong psychological profile. We started the integration process in March. Slow introduction of the genetic material, monitored response. She adapted better than anyone predicted. The tissue grafted completely. The morphological changes were controlled, symmetrical. We thought we'd succeeded. What happened? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She learned, Dr. Brown said. The polyploid genetics carry some kind of distributed intelligence, not conscious thought, more like instinct memory, problem solving at a predatory level. TR-187 started exhibiting behaviors we hadn't conditioned: tool use, pattern recognition, strategic thinking. 3 days ago, she broke containment during a routine examination. She killed 2 researchers before we could secure her in the holding cell. We thought we had her contained. He laughed, a broken sound that made my skin crawl. We were wrong. She'd been studying the facility layout through the security feeds. She understood the lock mechanisms. She waited until the night shift when staffing was minimal. Then she opened every holding cell on sub-level 3 and released all the partial integration subjects, 17 of them. Most were unstable, aggressive. She used them as a distraction while she moved through the facility, killing anyone she found. The wet sound I'd heard earlier suddenly made sense. The bodies upstairs with the identical wound patterns. The 7 puncture marks in perfect arcs, not claw marks, limb strikes. Something with 7 appendages that had learned to kill efficiently. Where is she now? Francis asked. Dr. Brown shook his head. I don't know. The cameras went dark 2 hours ago. She could be anywhere in the facility, or she could have left. The blast doors were open when you arrived, weren't they? Yeah, I said. Then she's probably gone, out into the swamp, where she came from originally. His eyes met mine. You need to understand, she's not human anymore. Not fully. The integration changed her on a fundamental level. She's stronger, faster, more resilient than any human. She can heal from injuries that would kill a normal person. And she's intelligent. She learns. She adapts. I thought about the missing woman from Norfolk. The photo marked full integration, active. 4 months ago, she'd been a person living a normal life. Now she was something else, something that had killed everyone in this facility and escaped into the Virginia wetlands. We need to report this, Edward said. Get hazmat, get containment teams, get someone who knows what the hell to do with this. I agreed. This was beyond our capability, beyond our equipment, beyond our mission parameters. I reached for my radio to contact Bates. Before I could key the transmit button, a sound echoed through the corridor from somewhere deeper in the facility, wet and rhythmic, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. The sound moved closer, steady and deliberate. Francis raised his rifle toward the darkness where the corridor branched to the left. His flashlight beam cut through the shadows, illuminating nothing but empty white tile. The dragging sound continued, closer now, maybe 30 feet away, just beyond the reach of our lights. Francis's finger moved to the trigger. His stance was perfect, textbook firing position, weight balanced and weapon steady. Then he lowered the rifle slowly. His face went slack, his eyes fixed on something in the darkness I couldn't see from my angle. Francis, I said. He didn't respond. He just stood there, weapon pointed at the floor, staring into the shadows with an expression I'd never seen on him before in 3 combat tours and 11 years of service. Not fear, not shock, recognition. The creature came out of the shadow at the end of the corridor like something that shouldn't exist. I saw it, and my brain tried to make it make sense, tried to categorize it as something I'd seen before, but it wouldn't fit anywhere. It had been human once. I could tell because there was still a face, not a good face, not a complete face, but enough of one that I could see what it used to be, a woman's features maybe, stretched over something that had grown too large for the original skin. The eyes were still there, kind of. They blinked. That was the worst part, I think, the blinking. Like some part of her was still in there, still operating on autopilot, even though everything else had changed. There was a wedding ring. I noticed it because my flashlight beam caught the gold and made it shine. It was embedded in what had been a hand, fused into the flesh now, the band half swallowed by skin that had turned gray and hard. The fingers had multiplied. I counted 7 on that hand alone, each one tipped with something that looked like a claw, but moved like a tentacle, curling and uncurling with a rhythm that didn't match anything human. The body had stretched, that's the only word I have for it, stretched and multiplied at the same time, like someone had taken a person and pulled them in 8 different directions while copying parts as they went. Limbs branched off limbs, creating this impossible structure that looked like roots or maybe veins, all of it moving independently but somehow coordinated. The skin, what used to be skin, had been replaced by something chitinous, something that glistened under the fluorescent lights like it was wet, but wasn't. It made a clicking sound when the pieces rubbed together. I heard Declan make a noise behind me. Not a word, just a sound. The creature moved, and I understood immediately that it wasn't just alive. It was smart. It circled us, not like an animal circles prey, but like a person sizing up a problem. The limbs shifted position as it moved, redistributing weight, adjusting angles. It was studying us. I could feel it. The eyes, her eyes, moved from face to face, lingering on each of us for maybe 2 seconds before moving to the next. Francis on my right, Edward and Declan behind me, Dr. Brown somewhere in the back, I think, probably frozen. Then the eyes came back to me and stayed there. My blood went cold, literally cold. I felt it in my chest, and my arms and my hands. The creature tilted what used to be a head, the movement jerky and wrong, like it was remembering how humans moved and trying to copy it. One of the branching limbs reached forward, not far, just a few inches. Testing. The claw tentacle things at the end curled and uncurled. It knew what we were. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. It recognized us as threats or obstacles, or maybe just targets. The intelligence in those eyes wasn't human anymore, but it wasn't animal either. It was something else, something aware. Contact, I said. My voice came out flat. Training kicked in, even though my brain was screaming. The gunshot was so loud in the enclosed space that I felt it in my teeth. Johnny Bates. I turned my head just enough to see him at the far end of the corridor, sidearm raised, firing again. 2 rounds, 3, 4. I watched them hit. Center mass, exactly where you're supposed to aim. The creature's torso jerked with each impact, the chitinous plating cracking, dark fluid spraying, but it didn't fall. It didn't even stop moving. I watched, we all watched, as the flesh around the bullet wounds rippled and shifted. The cracks in the plating sealed themselves in seconds. The dark fluid stopped flowing. The holes closed like water accepting stones, the surface smoothing over until there was no evidence the rounds had hit at all. The creature's head turned toward Bates. Slow. Deliberate. Then it lunged. I've seen fast things before. I've seen insurgents on adrenaline move like their muscles were powered by something more than biology. I've seen animals in the wild cover ground so quickly it didn't seem real. This was faster. The creature crossed the distance between itself and Bates in maybe half a second, the limbs propelling it forward in this horrible flowing motion that didn't look like running or crawling but something in between. Bates got off one more round before it reached him. The shot went wide. I heard it spark off the ceiling. The mass of limbs enveloped him. I couldn't see Bates anymore, just the creature, its body expanding and contracting, the limbs moving in coordinated waves, the clicking sound getting louder. There was a wet tearing noise, a scream, short and high-pitched, then cut off. "Fall back!" I shouted. The creature turned. Francis was on my right, already moving, already raising his weapon. He fired 3 rounds into the thing's center mass. Same result as Bates. The flesh absorbed them, healed, kept moving. The creature flowed toward him like water going downhill, inevitable and fast. "Francis, move!" I took 2 steps forward, firing as I went, aiming for the head this time. The rounds hit. The face, what was left of the face, cratered inward, then rebuilt itself before Francis could even turn around. The limbs took him. I saw Francis disappear into the mass, his body lifted off the ground, the creature's appendages wrapping around his chest and arms and legs, and pulling in 6 different directions at once. I heard something crack, bone probably, ribs. Francis made a sound I'd never heard him make, something between a shout and a gasp, and then the teeth, I hadn't even seen the teeth until that moment, closed around his throat. His eyes found mine for just a second, wide, surprised, then gone. "No," Edward's voice behind me, shaking. "No, no, no." The creature dropped Francis. What was left of Francis. It turned toward us, and I saw the teeth clearly now, rows of them lining what should have been a mouth, but had become something like a lamprey, circular and ringed with enamel that gleamed under the lights. Edward fired. Full magazine, probably. I lost count after 6. Declan fired too, both of them unloading everything they had into the creature's torso and head and limbs. The noise was deafening. The bullets hit, every single one of them, punching holes and cracking plating and spraying that dark fluid across the white tile. The creature healed faster than they could shoot. It moved toward them in that awful flowing motion, limbs extending, reaching. Edward stumbled backward, still firing even though his magazine had run dry, the trigger clicking uselessly. Declan tried to run, got maybe 3 steps before a limb wrapped around his ankle and yanked him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, the impact knocking his weapon out of his hands. "Eddie!" Declan's voice, high and terrified. Nothing like the confident kid I'd trained for 18 months. I ran toward him. Don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Training. Stupidity. I didn't make it. The creature pulled Declan toward itself, the limbs coiling around his legs, then his waist, then his chest. He screamed. The sound echoed in the corridor, bouncing off the white tile, filling my ears. Edward grabbed Declan's hand, trying to pull him back, his face twisted with effort and panic. The creature bit down. Edward's hand was still holding Declan's when the teeth closed. I saw his expression change from panic to shock to nothing. His body went limp. The creature released him and he dropped, blood pooling under his head from where it had struck the tile. Declan stopped screaming. I stood there, alone. The corridor was silent except for the clicking sound the creature made and the wet sounds of it feeding. Dr. Brown was gone, probably ran when the shooting started. Smart. Bates was dead. Francis was dead. Edward and Declan were dead. Everyone I'd served with. Everyone I'd trained. Gone in less than 60 seconds. The creature lifted what used to be a head and looked at me. Blood, human blood, dripped from the circular mouth. The limbs shifted position, repositioning for another lunge. I raised my sidearm. Knew it wouldn't work. Knew the bullets would hit and heal and mean nothing. Knew fighting was suicide. Then I remembered the armory. We'd passed it on the way down, 2 corridors back. Dr. Brown had pointed it out. Standard equipment, he'd said. Firearms and incendiaries for containment protocols. Incendiaries. The creature took a step forward. The limbs clicked against the tile. I ran. Not because I was afraid. I mean, I was afraid, obviously. I just watched that thing tear through 4 trained operators in under 60 seconds. But that's not why I ran. I ran because training took over. You don't stand and fight something you can't kill. You adapt. You survive. You complete the mission. The corridor blurred past me, white tile and fluorescent panels, and behind me I could hear the wet sounds of it feeding. That clicking noise. The chitinous plates scraping against each other as it moved. I didn't look back. Didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening behind me, and looking wasn't going to change anything. My boots hit the tile in a rhythm I'd trained for 11 years. Left, right, breathing steady even though my heart was trying to punch through my ribs. The armory was 2 corridors back. Dr. Brown had pointed it out when we'd first descended, mentioned it like it was no big deal. Standard firearms and incendiaries for containment protocols. At the time, I'd figured it was just procedure. Now I understood it was the only reason this place existed down here at all. I rounded the first corner and nearly slipped on something slick. Blood, probably. There was a lot of it in this place. I caught myself on the wall, kept moving. The formaldehyde smell was still overwhelming, but underneath it now was something else. Copper, fresh death, the kind of smell you get in your nose and can't shake for days. The second corridor looked identical to the first. White walls, white floor, white ceiling. Everything sterile and clean except for the screaming that echoed from somewhere deeper in the complex. Not my team. They were already gone. Someone else. Maybe another researcher who'd locked themselves in like Dr. Brown had tried to do. Maybe someone who hadn't made it to a door fast enough. I reached the armory door and yanked it open. No lock. That seemed stupid until I remembered what they'd been doing down here. They weren't worried about someone breaking in. They were worried about something breaking out. The room was maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, lined with metal shelving units bolted to the walls. Standard 9mm ammunition in boxes stacked 3 high, 2 M4 carbines mounted on the back wall, and on the bottom shelf, right where Dr. Brown said they'd be, 4 incendiary charges the size of thermoses, military grade, the kind we'd used in Kandahar to clear insurgent tunnels. I grabbed all 4. They were heavier than I remembered, maybe 5 pounds each, cold metal casings with digital timers on top. My hands didn't shake. I noticed that. Francis used to joke that I had ice water in my veins, that nothing rattled me. He was wrong. Plenty of things rattled me. I just didn't let my hands show it. The screaming stopped. I froze for maybe half a second listening. The silence was worse than the noise. It meant the creature was done with whatever it had caught. It meant it was hunting again. I set the first charge on the floor, twisted the timer dial to 5 minutes, and pressed the activation button. A small red light started blinking. 1 per second. I set the second charge to 5 minutes, then the third. The fourth I set to 4 minutes 30 seconds, just to stagger the detonation in case one failed. Redundancy. That's what keeps you alive. The clicking sound started again, distant but getting closer. Maybe 2 corridors away, maybe less. Sound traveled weird down here, bounced off all that tile and made it hard to judge distance. I bolted. Out of the armory, back into the corridor, sprinting toward the stairs. The fluorescent lights flickered as I passed underneath them. I didn't know if that was the creature or just bad wiring in a facility that had been running since the 70s. Didn't matter. I hit the stairwell at full speed and took the steps 3 at a time. 30 steps to the first landing, turned 90 degrees, 30 more steps. The air got warmer as I climbed, the formaldehyde smell fading back into copper and rust and old blood. The emergency lighting was still on in the upper level, bathing everything in that deep red glow that made it look like the inside of something dying. The 7 bodies were still in the entry corridor where we'd found them. Sentinel Tactical Solutions. Contractors who'd probably thought this was just another government job. Easy money for standing guard over some classified research. I stepped over the nearest one, the stocky guy with his rifle across his chest, and kept moving. Behind me, distant but clear, I heard the creature scream. It wasn't human. Couldn't be. But there was something in it that used to be, some leftover vocal cords that still remembered how to make sound. It was rage and hunger, and something else I didn't have a name for. The sound echoed up through the stairwell, bouncing off concrete and steel, and I ran faster. The blast doors were still hanging open. I could see moonlight past them, filtered through fog, the first real light I'd seen in what felt like hours, but had probably been 30 minutes. I cleared the threshold and kept running, across the empty storage area, past the metal shelving units, out into the Virginia night. The air hit me like a wall. Humid and thick and smelling like swamp rot. but after the formaldehyde, it was the best thing I'd ever breathed. I didn't stop. The tree line was maybe 50 yards from the bunker entrance, and I needed to be past it before the charges blew. My boots hit mud, and I nearly went down, caught myself on a tree trunk, kept moving. Spanish moss hung in my face, and I shoved through it. Behind me, I heard something metal, maybe the blast doors moving, maybe the creature coming through, but I didn't look back. I counted in my head. 4 minutes when I'd left the armory. Probably 3 minutes 30 seconds now. Maybe less. I pushed through another tangle of undergrowth, branches scraping my face and hands, and then I was past the tree line, 20 yards into the swamp, still running. The explosion hit like thunder. I felt it in my chest first, a pressure wave that knocked the air out of my lungs. Then the sound caught up, a deep, rolling boom that shook the ground under my feet. I turned in time to see the bunker entrance collapse inward, concrete and steel folding like cardboard, and then fire bloomed up out of the wreckage, orange and red and white hot at the center. The second charge blew, then the third, the fourth. Each one sent another shock wave through the swamp, and I watched the entire structure cave in on itself, floors pancaking down into the sub-level, everything that had been down there, the laboratory, the specimen jars, the wall of photographs, the operating tables, the creature, all of it buried under tons of rubble and fire. The swamp itself seemed to react. Mud shifted and flowed toward the collapsed entrance like water circling a drain, and within maybe 2 minutes the whole thing was sinking, the fire still burning but getting swallowed by wet earth and standing water. By the time the flames finally died, there was nothing left but a smoking crater that was already filling with swamp water. I stood there for a long time. Could have been 5 minutes. Could have been 20. I wasn't tracking anymore. Then I turned and started walking. The nearest road was 3 miles north. I knew that from the coordinates Bates had given us, from the map I'd memorized before we'd even left Norfolk. 3 miles through swamp in the dark with nothing but moonlight and fog. I kept my flashlight off, didn't want to draw attention, didn't know if there was anything left to draw attention from, but training doesn't turn off just because the immediate threat is gone. My legs moved on autopilot, left foot, right foot, avoid the deep water, step over the fallen logs, keep the North Star on my left and just walk. I thought about Francis, about the way he'd looked at me right before the creature bit down. Not scared, not even surprised really, just resigned, like he'd known this was coming eventually, that we'd pushed our luck too many times in too many shitholes around the world, and this was where it finally ran out. I thought about Edward and Declan. Kids, basically, 24 and 26. I'd trained them myself, watched them go from green recruits to solid operators. They'd trusted me, followed me down into that bunker because I'd told them to. I thought about Bates, the way his hands had shaken when he'd handed me the folder. He'd known, maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to be scared. And he'd sent us anyway. 3 miles, 1 foot in front of the other. The road appeared out of the fog like a miracle. 2-lane blacktop, cracked and faded but real, solid. I stood on the shoulder for maybe 10 minutes before I saw headlights. The truck was old, maybe a 90s Ford, primer gray with rust spots. It slowed when the driver saw me, pulled onto the shoulder about 20 feet ahead, and stopped. The driver's door opened, and a big guy climbed out. 6'1", heavy-set, wearing a flannel shirt and a baseball cap. "You all right there, buddy?" His voice had a slow Virginia drawl, friendly and concerned. "You look like you been through hell." I probably did. Covered in mud and swamp water, face scratched from branches, eyes that I knew from experience looked flat and dead after something like this. "Yeah," I said. "There was an accident. Gas main explosion back at the old depot." He squinted past me into the fog. "Depot? Didn't know there was anything out here but swamp." "It's abandoned," I said. "WBT munition storage. I was doing environmental assessment. Something ignited. It was a good lie. Simple, plausible. The kind of thing that explained why I looked like this without raising too many questions. The trucker, his name was Jimmy Barr, he told me later, nodded slowly. You need a hospital? I can run you into Suffolk. No, I said. Just a ride to town. I can make some calls from there. Jimmy looked at me for a long moment, probably trying to figure out if I was dangerous or just unlucky. Then he shrugged. All right, hop in. I climbed into the passenger seat. The cab smelled like coffee and cigarettes and something else, something normal and human. Jimmy pulled back onto the road, and we drove in silence for maybe 5 minutes before he spoke again. You sure you're okay? You're awful quiet. Just tired, I said. He didn't push. We drove into Suffolk, and he dropped me at a gas station off Route 58. I thanked him, shook his hand, and watched him drive away. Then I walked to the payphone outside the station and called the number Bates had given me for emergencies. A woman answered. I'd never heard her voice before. This is Morales, I said. Mission failed. Full team lost. Facility destroyed. Understood, she said. No emotion, no questions. Return to base, debriefing at 0600. The line went dead. The Navy never acknowledged the mission, not officially. There was no memorial service for Francis, Edward, or Declan, no flag-draped coffins, no notification to next of kin, because as far as the record showed, they'd died in a training accident 3 months earlier. Bates disappeared, transferred, they said, to some posting in the Pacific. I never saw him again. 2 weeks after Suffolk, a demolition crew showed up at Nansemond Ordnance Depot with official paperwork authorizing environmental remediation. They bulldozed what was left of the bunker, filled in the crater, and planted over it. The whole area got declared a protected wetland. No trespassing, no development, no questions. I got reassigned to a desk job in Norfolk, logistics coordination. I pushed papers for 6 months and then put in for discharge. They approved it without argument. I don't live in Virginia anymore. Moved to North Carolina, got a job doing security consulting for a firm that mostly handles corporate stuff. Boring work, safe work. The kind where nobody dies. But sometimes I drive through Virginia. Sometimes the route takes me past Suffolk, past that stretch of highway that runs parallel to the old depot land. And when the fog rolls in off the swamp, thick and moving in that weird, pulsing way, I slow down and I look. I tell myself I buried it. That 4 incendiary charges and a bunker collapse and half a swamp's worth of mud was enough. That TR-187 is dead and gone, along with all those specimen jars and tissue samples and whatever the hell else Paracelsus Applied Sciences had been growing down there for 40 years. I tell myself that, but I remember the way that thing healed, the way bullets cratered its face and the flesh just rebuilt, the way it moved, intelligent and hungry and so much faster than anything that size should be. And I remember Dr. Brown's words, adaptive biology, extreme environmental stress resilience. So yeah, sometimes driving past Suffolk I see that fog and I wonder if I buried the creature. Or if I just taught it to hide.